Pokémon tech or get registered by Professor Oak or a Nurse Joy. Wow. The brunette female breathed as she shook her head. Sounds like being an unofficial trainer just doesn't pay. Brock shook his head. Not if you want to make a serious life out of it and provide responsibly for yourself and or your family and Pokémon. And even then, if you really want to make a prosperous living as a Pokémon trainer, your best bet is to shoot for the stars and try to make the Elite Four when there's an opening or even become a regional champion. They actually get paid by the league itself like gym leaders do, only the salary is way up there in the six figures for them. But why is it only regional professors and Nurse Joys that can register you to be an official trainer? Giselle asked inquisitively again. Doesn't that sort of stretch them thin with all the people that constantly want to become licensed trainers? Brock nodded. That's why other institutions and organizations can become qualified as well through the Pokémon League to officially license trainers. But, since the job description for regional professors and Pokémon nurses already has that field required in their training, it's just far more common for them to do it. Ash chuckled. Which only leaves one to wonder now why seemingly every Pokémon nurse you encounter is always a joy. Everyone at the table laughed as Soledad replied teasingly. Same thing with Officer Jenny, I suppose. I guess some mysteries are just too hard to unravel. At the mention of the two groups of public-serving females that he loved most, it appeared Brock was about to go into La La Land, so that was why Misty suddenly changed course as fast as possible to prevent an awkward moment concerning the perverted teen. So Erica, it's been a busy 2 weeks at the shop, huh? I had no idea you guys had so many customers all the time. The lithe, slim young gym leader just gave a small laugh and looked at Misty. Well, we usually do have quite a few customers, but as you've seen over the last 2 weeks, the issue with the fire has attracted them like Venomoth to a bright light. Orchida nodded in agreement. That's right, if we wouldn't have had all of your assistance the way you have so kindly be helping us since you've been here, I don't know how we would have managed. She's right, Amari chimed. Your help really has been a huge boon to us, and without it, we would have suffered, I'm sure, dealing with the huge influx in clientele we've experienced. Well, it was our pleasure, Giselle assured with a smile. And I really enjoyed working somewhere that makes so many of the products me, my sisters and my mother all enjoy so much. Soledad seemed to form a slightly guilty expression then as she sighed. I'm just sorry for the fact that I won't get to be here to help out anymore after the next 3 days. Oh yeah, that's right, Brock spoke up in a somewhat thoughtful tone. Don't you have a contest coming up you have to attend? She nodded. The Fuchsia City one, yes. It starts in a week and a half, so I'll need time to actually get there and then prepare myself before it begins. Well, Soledad, we have really appreciated your help, Erica said in a grateful tone. Truthfully. Thank you for everything. The long-haired coordinator merely smiled and shook her head modestly while Ash looked in her direction. Soledad, I'm not gonna say we won't miss you. It's been really nice having you tag along with us the last while. And it's been super awesome having you teach me and Pokémon so many awesome contest training drills too. The woman in question smiled in a kind manner at the boy. It's been a joy working with you, Ash, you and your Pokémon. You all have some real talent, and I'm sure if you continue to try your hardest you'll get even stronger as time goes on. And I've enjoyed traveling with the four of you too. Her eyes scanned the younger trainers she had called companions ever since Saffron City. Really, it's been a joy. Speaking of, Erica suddenly interjected. Where are all of you planning to go to next? She asked of Ash and his traveling companions. Misty was the one to answer as she finished her food and pushed her plate away. Same place as Soledad actually. As you know, Erica, another of the main 8 gyms is in Fuchsia, so we decided some time back that we would go there next, that way Ash can earn another badge. But, the brunette blinked in confusion as she looked at each of the younger Pokémon trainers in turn. If that's your destination, why not just leave with Soledad so you don't have to part so suddenly? If it's about staying to help us, I assure you that we will have no issues whatsoever in. Ash cut her off at that moment by speaking up finally. No, Erica, it's not that, don't worry. It's more. He then looked amongst all of his friends and, without saying anything, knew they were all on the same page in thinking about the game lounge that served as Team Rocket's secret base. However, he didn't let the seriousness he felt at the subject show on his face for long as he glanced back at Erica and smiled again. We just have some detours we'd like to make along the way. Brock checked the guidebook on the gyms here in Kanto and he says there are 2 smaller ones on the way to Fuchsia. It's just a matter of taking a short few days detour to reach the 2 of them before actually getting there. Erica nodded in understanding. I see, that's understandable then. However, she sat back in her chair and tapped her chin before looking up at the sky above. So you're going to be taking on Koga. He's definitely a tough gym leader and his gym specializes in poison-type Pokémon, but that's nothing you can't learn from the guidebook. The flower-loving lady then looked to Ash and his friends again before stating with a somewhat nervous smile. Just be careful, all of you. Koga's gym itself is, well, unique. Unique? Misty asked, confused. How so? Erica sighed. Well, Koga and his sister like to dabble in ninjutsu. The gym they run actually serves as a dojo as well from which they teach the art to students that come to learn. Because of that, I've heard the building can be tricky to maneuver. Picking up her drinking glass, Erica continued while staring down into the ice cubes. People say that there are all kinds of traps that challengers have to traverse when they arrive. Like breakaway floors, false walls, mirror entryways and even Pokémon are supposedly set up in certain locations to ambush the trainers when they aren't expecting it. I don't know exactly which ones they use but from the challengers I've spoken to of mine that have come from Fuchsia and previously battled Koga before, he apparently likes the idea of using Voltorb and Electrode as exploding booby traps for the unsuspecting and unobservant trainer. They apparently are hidden in the walls, in the floor and even in the ceiling. Looking up after giving her little rundown of what she knew of the Fuchsia City Gym, Erica saw Ash and his friends all giving her wide-eyed looks of disbelief and shock with sweat drops running down their foreheads. Misty spoke slowly with a slanted mouth and beady blinking eyes. What was that again, Erica? Voltorb. Exploding. Giselle supplied with a nervous gulp. Smiling nervously and waving her hands in front of her, the pretty business owner and gym leader laughed in a very similar manner. Oh, but I'm sure you'll all be just fine though, don't worry. Hey. Ash rubbed the back of his neck. Man, I guess we'll have to be extra careful when we go to that gym then, huh? I really don't want our journey to get cut short by being reduced to a pile of smoldering ashes. Besides. He then looked at Pikachu down on the ground a short ways away from the table and smiled humorously. You already have a knack for leaving me smoldering every time you shock me. Ain't that right, buddy? The little electric type looked back at his trainer and tilted an ear to the side in confusion before smiling as he processed what Ash said. Smiling brightly, Pikachu chirped a peppy reply of, Pika Pi Pika. Which had everyone at the table laughing. After a few seconds, Soledad stopped laughing and then looked over at her younger friends before saying with some amusement. I'm sure you guys will be fine. Just don't let old Rockhead over here lead you with his map the same way he does on the road. Brock appeared indignant at that comment and was just about to retort a reply when Misty chortled and then laughed outright. True that, Soledad, I think Brock could get us lost in a Pokemart department store when he's following that map of his. Deciding to just accept it with good graces, Brock let out a small chuckle himself and then crossed his arms. Alright, fine, have your fun. But you'll be begging for me and my crazy map when we leave the city and start heading out into the countryside again. Don't worry, Brock, Ash assured as he looked over at his friend with certain mischief shining in his eyes. If we do get lost, I'll just use the GPS in my X-transceiver. You know, like I was gonna do back when we first started traveling together. Yeah, but it's okay, you stick to that map. The entire table descended into laughter once more while Brock hung his head and thumped his forehead onto the table itself. Oh, I never get any respect. Indeed, poor Brock was the butt of the day's jokes, at least until Giselle let word slip of Ash and his mother's constant proclivity of needing to remind him to wear clean underwear. Who knew anyone could turn such a shade of red anyway? Maybe being teased for poor topographical skills wasn't so bad after all. XXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXX as he fell back to the grassy ground beneath him and looked up at the clear sky above. I think that's enough for today, guys. Pika. An equally drained Pikachu muttered in agreement before crawling over and collapsing next to his trainer. Surrounding them were Ash's other Pokémon, including an exhausted Misty and Giselle, as well as their own just as beaten down Pokepartners. The time was not quite noon and the group of friends were all gathered in the Celadon Park, a location that had quickly become a favorite training spot for all of them during their time in the city. It had been 4 days since Ash's victory over Erica and exactly 1 day since Soledad had left their company. The latter event had been a saddening one, but they all understood her need to make it to Fuchsia City to prepare for her contest. On the bright side though, she had taken advantage of the last few days they had together to put Ash and his Pokémon through contest drills as much as possible. That had worked to Ash's favor as well since, the day after his victory over Erica, he had made the decision to send for Squirtle and Charmander from back at the lab. Essentially giving him a 6-Poke squad once again counting Pikachu, Bulbasaur, Oddish and Roselia. His reasoning for re-obtaining the other 2 Kanto starter Pokémon had mostly been due to the fact that, with Bulbasaur already on his team and Soledad running them all through contest drills, he wanted his terrible trio, as he called them, to get experience working on the training regimen together. While it was true that he had been instructing each Pokémon he worked with personally on the drills Soledad taught him so they could then pass those same teachings onto their comrades at the lab back home, there were some groups of his Pokémon that simply worked together better than others. Charmander, Squirtle and Bulbasaur being one of those groups. Even though Ash knew Bulbasaur could simply teach his 2 teammates what he, Pikachu, Oddish and Roselia had been learning over the last 2.5 weeks from Soledad once he went back to Professor Oak's ranch, the young Palette native preferred honing their skills in that particular area together. Much of his rationale for that decision was rooted in his desire to perfect the combat dome shield, or counter-defense, method, that they had constructed quite some time back. The first use being in their battle against the Team Rocket commander, Elenia, back on the St. Anne. In Ash's mind, even though Soledad's contest training was far different than normal battle drilling, every Pokémon could improve from learning something outside of their comfort zone. Even when it came to moves and combination techniques, not simply physical attributes. When he first started working with them after getting Charmander and Squirtle sent back to him, Ash had definitely found himself glad that his Pokémon passed along all they learned from him back to their teammates at home. This was due to the fact that, even though they had never worked with he or Soledad personally concerning contest training, Squirtle and Charmander had been taught what Ash's other Pokémon knew whom already had undergone such training. Such as Fearow, Primeape, Parasect and Victreebel. Because of his Pokémon's constant combined team effort to pass along each other's knowledge, Charmander and Squirtle had been practicing steadily at learning how to move, fight and even think like a contest-performing Pokémon. Naturally, since they didn't have any first-hand training with Ash or Soledad herself, the two of them were a little often rough around the edges on some of their movements, but, after the first day of training, their performances had definitely improved. In many ways, what Ash originally saw with Squirtle and Charmander was what he imagined his other water-type Pokémon back home probably looked like when the Gyarados of his that had been contest training with Pikachu, weeks prior, started working with them. He knew that the atrocious Pokémon had most likely been working with his fellow Gyarados on what he had learned, perhaps including even Krabby and Starmie as well, and if that were indeed the case, Ash imagined his water-based Pokémon probably now had a rough grasp of contest-specific training. Maybe even to the same degree that his land, air-based Pokémon likely now possessed after Primeape and the others passed on their own knowledge to them. That naturally brought to mind how he would pass on such teachings personally to Dragonite and Tentacruel, but those were concerns for another day. Such massive bodies would take a lot of finesse and care to be able to move with any level of grace whatsoever, and such a task would be daunting, at best. For Charmander and Squirtle's team training with Bulbasaur the day after Soledad and Ash evened up their contest-based abilities, they had basically worked on the same types of drills and overall regimen that the others had been doing for the last 2 weeks or so. For Pikachu, Oddish, Roselia and Bulbasaur, especially Pikachu whom had the most constant experience, their training with Soledad wasn't just with her, but also with her own Pokémon. Ash and his friends had been more than just a little impressed back when she first revealed her full 3-squad team of Pokémon to them. Aside from Butterfree and Slowbro, the red-headed coordinator also possessed a beautiful, incredibly fast Pidgeot that, while not as outright powerful and durable as Ash's own, most definitely possessed speed in leaps and bounds. For her original training regimen that had just involved Pikachu, Bulbasaur and the other 2 grass-type females Ash proudly called his own, Soledad had them practice alongside her own Pokémon in single bouts. Sometimes as groups as well, though mostly individually. Since all 4 of Ash's Pokémon knew by now how to move and fight like contest Pokémon, at least to a certain extent, Soledad increased the intensity of that training by pairing them up against Pokémon that did contest battles as a constant career. The training regimen in question revolved around her Pokémon drilling them harshly on movement training, agility drills, power control, combat practice, moves and technique honing, combination attacks and partner battle routines. In many ways, Ash thanked Soledad's added contest training into their normal routine over the last 2.5 weeks for helping Oddish become even better prepared for the battle they had against Erica. To his mind, the confidence in her movements, increased agility and on-the-spot rapid thinking that Oddish had gained from the unique training all helped accelerate her already rapidly growing development. Of course, it was common knowledge that grass-type Pokémon grew quickly anyway under the right trainer, but Ash still thanked Soledad for quite a bit of it. Oddish, much like Roselia, proved to be quite adept at contest training. Neither was at Pikachu's level of course, but then again, he had been training in such a fashion the longest. Interestingly enough, even though Bulbasaur had been training gruelingly with the other 3 Pokémon he called friends over the long span of time they had been in the city, he simply hadn't been picking it up as fast as Pikachu, Roselia and Oddish. It wasn't that Soledad, her own Pokémon or Ash were bad at teaching him, but as his trainer, the raven-haired boy had easily been able to tell something wasn't right with Bulbasaur. Although, it hadn't been until 3 days prior when Charmander and Squirtle joined them again did he actually see why. As soon as the former 2 rejoined Ash's team and got involved in the same boot camp style training as their 4 partners with Pidgeot, Slowbro and Butterfree, a pattern emerged rather quickly. One in which not just Ash, but also everyone else picked up on. Somehow, in some way Ash felt as though he should have expected, the 3 opposing-typed Pokémon seemed to grasp whatever they were learning, far faster, whenever they did it together. To some people that might not really make a lot of sense, but for their trainer, it indeed made quite a bit of it. From the time Charmander and Squirtle joined them, and even though the training was mostly singular or as one huge group, if they did do something as a team, they and Bulbasaur just seemed to naturally gravitate to each other in all they did. Not only did the 3 small Pokémon seemingly form their own private training group, but they also appeared to, well, challenge one another. Almost like being rivals. To Ash, someone who couldn't personally understand the logic of having a rival, such a thing was a little surprising, but the results were undeniable. Whereas Bulbasaur struggled in adapting to the contest training, perhaps due to his quadruped nature, he quickly began improving by leaps and bounds when Charmander and Squirtle showed up. The main reason Ash figured this was because of how easily the fire and water-type Pokémon, respectively, caught up to Pikachu, Oddish and Roselia. Rather it being due to natural talent or the luxury of standing on 2 legs, neither of them had struggled much at all. By contrast, Bulbasaur had struggled quite a bit and had been ever since beginning the different type of training. As soon as his 2 friends and teammates appeared, however, it was almost as though a switch had been flipped which caused him to experience rapid improvement. Now, In just the short 3 days Soledad had to work with them before she finally left, Bulbasaur was moving with just the same level of grace and fluidity as all the others. To said grass type's trainer, the reasoning as to why couldn't have been made clearer. Ash believed that Bulbasaur, Charmander and Squirtle shared a bond, a special bond. One in which made them friends but also rivals. In all the time they had been together with him he always would see them training together no matter what it was. Physical training, move drilling, sparring, battle tactics, it really didn't matter. It truly was funny how little one noticed at the time, but after having witnessed Bulbasaur's rapid improvement, which began as soon as the other two Kanto starters showed up, Ash was now convinced. Holy. For the three of them in particular, no matter what it was, Bulbasaur, Charmander and Squirtle simply did better together. They pushed each other and they made one another stronger. That was as clear as the sky Ash was currently observing high above. In fact, it was while he laid there on the slightly chilly ground in the early November climate of the day, that Ash was disrupted from his reflection of Soledad's positive effect on his Pokémon when he heard Giselle sigh. You know, a part of me is kind of upset I didn't take Soledad up on her offer to train us too. She spoke whimsically as the brunette laid beside of her drained-looking Graveler and Marowak, sweat still clinging to her body even though the slightly chilly air tried to turn it to steam. Ash tilted his head back so he could see past the ring of his own Pokémon that he was in and saw Misty, laying a short distance away from Giselle, shifting up onto her elbow. Wiping her forehead with the neckline of her dark red workout shirt, the former Cerulean City gym leader shrugged. So was I, at least a little bit. But you know we weren't ready, Giselle. Her eyes then shifted towards the large pond that was located in the almost exact center of the park they were currently in. A pond in which the orange-haired girl's dead tired-looking water-type Pokémon were floating lazily upon the surface of. Neither are our Pokémon. If Ash's training regimen still beats us down like this, then imagine what it would have been like if we would have done double with Soledad. Look at how hard it was on Ash and his own Pokémon. They suffered almost every day and barely got through it. What would have happened to us? Giselle sighed again and sat up to look out at the pond in front of her. Yeah, I know. I was just being silly, that's all. Her eyes then narrowed slightly as she leaned forward and stared intently at the body of water Misty's Pokémon were lounging in. Hey guys, do you find it weird that after all the time we've been here we haven't seen one Grimer in this pond? I mean, isn't that the rumor? Ash himself sat up and had to avoid getting his leg in Charmander's tail flame as he himself looked out at the lake. Yeah, I guess you're right, Giselle, that is weird. Maybe it's just an urban myth, you know. Before she could reply, Brock suddenly called out from a picnic table a short distance away that he had been tending a small grill near. Hey guys. Lunch is ready. Come get it. He then left the park grill and started serving the Pokémon food he had also been making to his own Pokémon, whom had been relaxing around the picnic area with their culinary professional of a trainer. I've also got the food ready for our Pokémon too, so hurry over. Like the announcement of food was a magic energy rejuvenating spell, Ash's and the two girls' Pokémon shot off towards the picnic table like it was a race. All traces of exhaustion and fatigue temporarily forgotten in the all-encompassing desire for food. Sharing an amused glance with one another, the three tired trainers shook their heads at their Pokémon's food-obsessed antics before making their way over to join them. Albeit, with a little less enthusiasm due to the feeling of jelly legs that still remained from their own intense workouts. After helping Brock feed the Pokémon and then situating themselves around the picnic table, the group of friends settled in for their own meal as Ash sighed tiredly and rested his arms on the wooden surface. It's been such a busy couple of weeks. I'm not gonna lie and say I'm not tired. He then quickly moved his arms back as Brock set his plate down in front of him. Smiling and offering his friend a thank you, Ash shrugged. But, I can't complain. It's been pretty eventful. Misty shook her head and then picked up her fork so she could enjoy the toro steak and potatoes meal Brock had prepared for them all. We're not done yet though, are we? Her question was left open-ended, but everyone at the table knew what the lithe, athletic girl was talking about. They still hadn't went over the details yet for the game lounge that secretly belonged to Team Rocket. Yeah, I guess we aren't. Giselle replied in a slightly nervous tone of voice, finally being the one to voice what was on all their minds. We still need to plan for the game lounge, don't we? The table fell into silence for a few moments before Brock sighed as he put his elbows on the table and placed his fork back onto his plate. It needs to be discussed sometime or another. Better late than never, right, Ash? He finished his statement by looking over at his younger friend, who was now entertaining Oddish as she sat in his lap and allowed him to gently stroke the leaves on her head. However, instead of answering, Ash seemed not to notice the question being directed his way, focusing all of his attention on his Pokémon instead. Ash, Giselle asked softly as she reached over and touched his hand. Did you hear what we said? In an equally strange action, the young man picked his fork up again with his free hand and stabbed a few potatoes, which he shoved into his mouth while exclaiming around the mouthful uncharacteristically, and, Brock, these potatoes are good. Eel good. His friends looked at him strangely, but before they could question him, Ash's X-transceiver suddenly went off on his wrist and began ringing in the alert that someone was calling. Quickly moving to answer the call by raising his arm and pressing a button on the side of the device, the black-haired trainer sat back and ignored his friend's looks in favor of focusing on the screen. A screen which went from black to revealing the smiling face of Professor Oak on the other end. Seeing his mentor and grandfather figure, Ash smiled and greeted happily, "Hey Professor. What are you doing calling all of a sudden?" The aged Pokémon professional gave a kind greeting to his favorite pupil in return. "Well, hello Ash. Yes, I know this is most unusual for something so out of the blue, but I wanted to see how things were going for you and your friends. How are you? And don't forget the Pokémon." Ash nodded and smiled again while shifting the screen of his mobile high-tech device by moving his arm across the picnic table. "Everyone's doing great, Professor. Say hi everybody." Misty, Giselle and Brock all gave their own greetings, kind smiles and waves to the likable Pokémon researcher, while Pikachu and all of Ash's other Pokémon, whom were eating a short distance away from the table, stopped just long enough to look back and sound off in greeting to their second favorite human after Ash himself. Bringing his arm and thereby the X-transceiver's screen back onto him again, Ash chuckled and shrugged. "As you can see, Professor, everyone's doing great." Feeling a tug on his arm though, he looked down and saw Oddish trying to get his attention with one of her head leaves. Believing he knew what she wanted and smiling in slight amusement, the tracksuit-wearing trainer lowered his wrist to her level. "Wait a minute, I missed one." Seeing Professor Oak's face appear in front of her eyes a few seconds later, Oddish seemed to beam in excitement before giving a happy sound off. Oddish. Odd. Looking at his device's communications window again, Ash reached down to rub Oddish's head while chuckling once more. "Okay, now that's it. Oddish gets a little offended if she's left out of anything important." The gray-haired older man smiled with some form of similar amusement before nodding. "Don't I know? It's good to see all of you doing so well, and your Pokémon appear to be just as happy and healthy as ever." "Where are you now?" "Celadon City," Ash answered. "I actually just had my battle against the gym leader here, Erica, yesterday. We came through and my Pokémon did an awesome job. Bulbasaur, Roselia and Oddish battled like pros and I couldn't be prouder of them." "Yes, well, I'm not surprised," Oak replied. "They train hard when they're here, so I know it had to have shown in their gym battle." "How was Oddish in her first match?" The boy looked down at Oddish and smiled. "She did incredible, Professor. A little nervous at first and got off to a slightly shaky start, but she pulled herself together in no time and pulled off an awesome win." "I see, well, good." The renowned professor nodded, almost knowingly. "How many badges are you up to currently, if I may ask?" Ash smiled widely before answering in an obviously proud fashion. 16, Professor. We've been battling hard and training even harder, and it's really shown." Oak's eyes widened slightly at that revelation. 16, you say? My boy, that is most impressive indeed. You effectively now have double the badge number you need to gain entrance into the Indigo League. That is no small accomplishment for you or your Pokémon, Ash, so don't forget to take time to fully appreciate just how far you've come. And in only 5 months' time too. I am very proud of you. All of you. Ash smiled. Thanks, Professor, and trust me, we all know just how big this is. If it wasn't for my Pokémon and their trust in me, I wouldn't even have one badge yet, and my friends have helped us more than I can put into words. The Pokémon professor nodded once more before leaning forward a bit and then giving a small smile. Well, truth be told, Ash, I didn't just call to see how you were doing. Just this morning I was greeted with company and it's been quite some coming. I figured you and your friends would want to know she finally arrived safely. Huh? Ash blinked before tilting his head in slight confusion. Who are you talking about, Professor? Instead of answering him, Oak merely made a waving gesture to his side and then slid out of the picture just as the familiar face of none other than Salia herself filled the void. Hi, Ash. She greeted cheerfully with a wave. I finally made it. Seeing the former trainer of who was now his pink Butterfree, the mate of his first one, Ash sat forward and questioned in surprise. Salia. Is that you? Hearing the name, Giselle, Misty and Brock all pushed in beside and behind Ash and shoved their faces into the screen's image. Salia. Giselle exclaimed in an equal state of surprise before a smile crossed her lips. Hey, how are you? Yeah, it's been so long, Misty spoke up from Ash's left. We didn't know when we'd hear from you again. Did you make it safely to the professor's lab? Brock asked while standing directly behind his friend. Didn't run into any issues on the way, did you? The chocolate-haired woman offered a smile to each of the 4 traveling companions before replying to all of them as a whole. Hey everyone, and thanks, I'm doing really well. Yeah, the trip was fine, didn't have any problems getting here. It just took a while longer than it should have because, well. She then gave a small, slightly nervous laugh and sweat dropped. I might have done a little sightseeing and shopping in a few of the cities I passed through on the way here. Her sheepishness quickly faded, however, as excitement took precedence. But once I finally got here this morning, I was amazed. Pallet Town is so beautiful and quaint, and the ranch itself is beyond anything I ever imagined. At that moment, the excited young woman looked to her left out of the view of the screen and then smiled brightly when, seconds later, her former Butterfree came flying in and perched itself upon her shoulder. Following suit, the pink female's yellow scarf-wearing mate flew in as well and landed on her shoulder. Professor Oak took me out to meet the Pokémon shortly after I got here, and when we got to your Pokémon, Ash, I got to be reunited with my old Butterfree again. Salia gushed while looking up and sharing an adoring look with her former Pokémon, of whom gave the same look of mutual adoration to her old trainer. Smiling at the sight of 2 of his Pokémon, Ash waved at the screen and called out in greeting. Hey guys. How are you doing back home? Ya miss me? Free. The mated Butterfree pair eagerly sounded in unison while waving their wings at him. Free. At that same moment, both Pikachu and Oddish popped their faces into the picture and started giving friendly greetings to their friends back at the lab, to which the male and female Butterfree responded by chattering in their own native speech from their perch atop Salia's shoulder. After a few seconds of letting them catch up, Ash focused on Salia again and asked curiously, so I'm guessing that since you're talking to me from the lab, you and Professor Oak had a good first meeting. Oh yes. The beautiful young woman replied with a very cheerful tone. He was so nice and welcomed me just like I was an old friend. I was really nervous meeting the famous Professor Oak, but after getting to talk to him for a while, I felt silly that I was ever afraid at all. Appearing back in the image on screen again, Oak himself chuckled and I smiled in good humor. Yes, I could tell she was nervous when we first met, but after getting the chance to converse with her for a short time, I couldn't believe her anxiety myself. Salia is an absolute delight and such a bright young woman. I really must thank you for sending her to me, Ash. The trainer in question smiled in slight relief. That's great, Professor. So did you both talk about her becoming your assistant and staying there at the lab to help you out? The aged man gave an affirmative nod. Yes, indeed we did. And I must say I couldn't be happier for the opportunity. I can tell Salia here has some real potential as a Pokémon researcher and her love for Pokémon is deep and true. Having the help of someone so much younger around here to assist me in caring for all the Pokémon only makes the deal that much sweeter. Ash offered a small smile, showing his happiness for both of them. Well, that's awesome. Hopefully we'll get to see you all again here before too terribly long. Oak nodded. Indeed, my boy, indeed. Well, I suppose I should let all of you go so you can get back to your day. Be sure to keep me informed and hopefully we can talk soon. Salia smiled and nodded in the affirmative. That's right. You guys just make sure to enjoy your adventures and I'll help Professor Oak here with all of the Pokémon, count on it. They all said their goodbyes shortly after that, both of the Butterfree on Salia's shoulder included, and then once Ash hung up he sat back inside. That's a relief to know she got there safe. And it's good to know that Professor Oak took her on like he said he would, Giselle chimed in. Brock nodded in agreement but then looked over at Ash. So, about what we were going to talk about before you got that call, Ash, However, before the older boy could finish, Ash suddenly stood up and then stretched his arms. "Ah, well, that was a great meal, Brock, thanks. I think I'm gonna go check in with the Pokémon and see how they are now." Without another word, Ash was already up and gone from the picnic table, leaving his friends to stare after him, including the food that he had left unfinished, with confusion upon their faces. "Is he okay?" Misty questioned. "Ash sure is acting strange all of a sudden." Brock and Giselle nodded their agreement but neither of them said anything. The former of the two though stared after his friend with his forehead creased in thought as he silently contemplated to himself. XXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXX at the end of a long day of training and sightseeing in the city, Ash stepped out of his and Brock's shared bathroom in the room they were staying in while toweling off his hair from the shower he had just taken. Sighing to himself as he rubbed the pleasantly smelling fabric over his face, Ash eventually pulled it down and saw Brock, Misty and Giselle all gathered in the room. Giselle was sitting on his bed, Misty was on Brock's, and the aforementioned teen himself was sitting on the desk chair near the window. Upon seeing them, he questioned in a curious tone, something up, guys? Brock was the one to answer as he crossed his arms. Yeah, we wanted to know when you were interested in planning this whole operation that we've been talking about pulling at the game lounge. We can't just go half-cocked with no plan. As soon as he mentioned the game lounge, Ash seemed to become a little fidgety and nervous as he looked around a few times before speaking in a clearly stalling voice. Hey, is it just me or did it get cold in here? Man, chilly. I should probably go down and ask Nurse Joy what's going on. Just as he went to make for the door, Misty spoke up in an irritable tone. Darn it, Ash, stop procrastinating and just sit down so we can talk this thing over. You're not really acting like you're taking this very seriously, Ash, Giselle added in a softer, calmer tone. The boy turned around to face her. What are you saying? Of course I am. I'm just cold as all. Brock looked at his friend disbelievingly and then spoke to confirm as much. If that's true, then why did you change the subject all of a sudden earlier back at the park? After Professor Oak called you just up and left to go check on the Pokémon without so much as giving any hint as to what, or even how, you want to go pulling this off. Do you honestly think it's going to be as easy as just waltzing in, doing what we're going to do and then leaving? Misty all but demanded. If that's the way you think, then we might as well go ahead and dig graves for ourselves right now. This really isn't like you, Ash, Giselle observed in a worried tone of voice. Usually you're always so enthusiastic to take on any challenge, but for this you've just suddenly. At that moment, the young Ketchum snapped in a way that made his friends, as well as Pikachu on his bed, jump in shock. I know, okay. I just need time to think and this isn't helping, so please leave me alone for right now. Without another word, he promptly ran over to his shoes by the door, jumped into them and then left the room in a blur of quick movement, not so much as even looking back or putting on the top half of his tracksuit as he went. For several moments his friends stared after him before Misty stood up and held her hands out. The hell was that about? She then growled. Oh, that's it. I'm gonna go give him a piece of my mind. Just before she could storm out the door though, Brock stopped her by holding his hand out and standing up. Misty, wait. Stopping in her tracks, she turned and glared back at her former fellow gym leader. What? He can't just get mad at us like that and then leave for no reason. It's totally. I get it, Brock agreed with a small nod. I don't understand why he did it either, but let's give him the benefit of the doubt. Ash is obviously upset about something, or he's got a lot on his mind, otherwise he wouldn't have done something like that. You and I both know that's true, Misty. Let's just all let him go walk whatever this is off and have a chance to collect his thoughts, okay? He finished by looking to both her and Giselle. It was obvious neither girl, nor Pikachu, liked the idea of simply sitting around while Ash went off to Arceus only knew where, but Brock's advice couldn't be soundly disputed. With that realized, they all simply resigned themselves to waiting behind for him to return and hoping that Ash would be alright. XXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXX nighttime streets of Celadon City with his hands in his pockets. As he walked amongst the many other people passing him on both sides of the street, the young trainer was facing towards the ground, which he looked at distantly as his feet carried him on to whoever knew where. His mind lost deeply in thought all the while. Ash hadn't meant to be so abrupt and snappish with his friends, since he knew they were truly just trying to help him and do what they had promised by supporting him in no matter what it was he got into. In all truth though, that was part of what was bothering him so badly. For Ash, everything was just culminating into such a seemingly insurmountable challenge that he didn't know how or even if he could overcome it. When Arceus told him that he was her chosen one at a young age, he had been ecstatic at hearing it. The possibilities of what such an implication could hold in store was nearly beyond imagining, and the thought excited him. Of course it did. Who wouldn't it excite when one was so young and naive to the ways of the world? Now though, for the first time, Ash was really beginning to question himself. Question the ability of what he could accomplish and what he could actually do to bring about the kind of change Arceus expected of him. Come on, he was just a kid after all. No matter how mature and unusual for a 10-year-old he might have been, he was still only 10. For the first real time he was beginning to wish Arceus had never told him that he was her chosen one. That he could just go through life blissfully ignorant of the fact and not have such an impossible weight resting upon his shoulders. As he walked along and looked at all of the people he saw filling the streets of Celadon, he couldn't help but feel almost sick to his stomach at the severity and intensity of what his destiny really entailed. If he was really supposed to bring about great change, then that meant every person he saw in the whole city, and that was tiny compared to the whole wide world itself, would all be depending on him in some way. Or at the very least be massively impacted by whatever decisions he made. To think about and ponder on such a conclusion was enough to make anyone, let alone a 10-year-old child, feel almost as though it wasn't even real. As though he might collapse at any moment from the weight of the responsibilities that, for all intents and purposes, wasn't really even coming down upon him just yet. Seeing families with their children, shop owners doing their best to please their patrons, businessmen and women going about their rushed lives that seemed to cease not even in the night hours, individuals driving up and down the congested city roads with their own unique destinations to reach, all of it felt to Ash like he was somehow responsible for them. All of them. And to compound onto all of it was the matter facing him with Team Rocket and the game lounge. The more he thought about and contemplated over the entire situation, the more Ash felt completely outclassed by the larger-than-life shadow that it seemed to cast over him. In so many ways Ash had no clue how he and his friends would go about accomplishing the goal they had set before themselves. Break in, gain whatever info they could, and then what? How would they take them down? How would they contend with a whole legion of rocket agents if they encountered them? How would they even go about breaking into such a well-known and most likely highly secured building in the first place? It was moments like the one he found himself in now that Ash was forced to realize a very painful realization. He was 10 years old. They were all so young, just kids really. How could they tackle a massive criminal organization and come out on top? The thing that was keeping Ash from just rushing in half-cocked was common sense. Even if they could succeed in their endeavors with no serious issues or casualties, what about the aftermath? They were all lucky to have Team Rocket at large believe them to be dead after the incident on the Saint. But if they really did what they had planned at the game lounge, that gift of anonymity would go straight out the window. Team Rocket was a merciless, evil organization with vast arms of far-reaching power. What would keep them from retaliating against his mother, Professor Oak, his Pokémon back home, Gary's mother and sister, or anyone he cared about for that matter? And what about his friends' families? Would they be spared some form of ruthless retaliation? All of those thoughts and more had Ash truly feeling fearful and flat-out insignificant in the grand scheme of things. There was simply too much for them all to lose to just get involved meddling in the affairs of an organization that could so easily kill them and everyone they loved and held dear. It wasn't until he reached the Celadon Park again and found a bench to sit on did the boy finally have a chance to sit and just contend with all of the thoughts swirling through his brain at the moment. The longer he sat where he was and thought over his present situation though, Ash realized that no amount of brooding would possibly help him get through what he was feeling right now. Laying his hand up into his face, he groaned to himself and remained unmoving for several long minutes. "Mommy, can I get my face painted? Please." The high voice of a young girl could be heard pleading a short few feet away. Looking up from his hands, Ash saw a little brown-haired girl with her parents pointing at a face-painting artist who was sitting in front of his easel with a brush and painting tray in his hand. Well, okay. Her mother relented after seeing how enthused her daughter was. But nothing too extreme or gaudy, understand. With a cheer, the little girl ran up to the face painter and started telling him what she wanted to look like, which conveniently enough was a Pikachu, and then hopped up on the stool as the artist went to work. Ash, for his part, simply sat where he was on the bench and just stared as the little girl had her face painted. In so many ways, seeing something so simple taking place shouldn't have really been much to see or think on, but, for Ash, the longer he stared, the more the wheels in his brain started to turn. Eventually, like a bolt of lightning from Pikachu himself, Ash stood straight up with his eyes as wide as Pokeballs. Mouth slightly agape, he gasped out a rushed, "That's it!" to himself before taking off running like Tauros at dinner time. She would never know it, but the little girl whose face was now gradually taking the painted form of a Pikachu had just become inadvertently responsible for a pivotal moment in history that would have lasting ripple effects to someday change the whole world. XXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXX make a decision on whether or not they should go look for Ash when the door to his and Brock's room suddenly slammed open and the aforementioned young trainer came running in. "Guys!" he yelled as he charged in and looked around. "I just had the perfect idea." Seeing the friend they had been so worried for suddenly appearing again, the other three jumped while Pikachu bounded off the bed and ran up to Ash. "Pika Pie!" he cheered in his own language as he jumped at his trainer and nuzzled against his chest. "Ash!" Misty yelled as she looked at him in shock while he hugged Pikachu with a smile on his face. "Where the heck did you go and why did you just leave like that?" "Yeah, we were worried sick about you, Ash." Giselle fretted. "What was that all about?" Seeing the concerned, yet also demanding looks on his friends' faces, Ash sighed and then walked over to his bed. Sitting down on it with Pikachu in his lap, the young trainer rubbed the back of his head and spoke. "Guys, I'm sorry for just running out on you like that earlier. And for getting short with you. I'm really sorry. Why don't you just tell us why you did it first and then we'll think about forgiving you?" Brock advised as he sat down on top of the desk near the door. The black-haired boy slowly nodded and then started with another sigh. "It's just, well, I was feeling a little overwhelmed, I guess. You know, with everything that's been happening. Especially concerning the plan we were trying to make concerning Team Rocket and the game lounge." He looked amongst his friends and explained himself honestly. "I was thinking about how dangerous they are and what would happen to not just us but our families too if they found out about us. We're just kids at the end of the day and they're this gigantic criminal organization. I started thinking it was all just a fantasy what we were planning to do to them, and it got to my nerves. I'll admit it, I'm not perfect. His three friends shared a look between them before Brock finally sighed and slowly nodded. I'll be honest, Ash, I've been thinking along the same lines for a while now. Ever since the incident on the Saint Anne. I just haven't wanted to say anything out of respect for you. I know we all promised that we would stand behind you, so I felt a little trapped when it came to saying anything. Ash is right though, Misty said slowly as she looked down at the floor. If Team Rocket found out who I was, then my sisters could be put into incredible danger, and I don't even want to think about how. Giselle nodded in agreement but then asked the question that was on all three of their minds. What do we do about it then? Do we just leave the city and forget about what we were planning? It was then that Ash smiled and shook his head. Not anymore. See, while I was out thinking, I suddenly had this great idea while watching this little girl getting her face painted. His friends just looked at him and blinked. Come again? Brock questioned in confusion. You got an idea, watching someone getting their face painted? The other boy nodded vigorously. Yeah, and I think it'll work too. The idea it gave me was, if we're afraid of Team Rocket finding out who we are and doing something to our families, then why not just change who we are so they won't know? There was silence at first, met by Misty's somewhat sarcastic retort of, oh yeah, Ash, great idea. We'll just become totally different people and then change back. Why didn't I think of that? He shot Misty a look but explained nonetheless. No, I'm being serious, listen. If we could change our appearances completely, maybe even make ourselves look older on top of looking different, Team Rocket would have no idea who we were, meaning our families would be safe. Yeah, okay. Brock started. That might work, but even still, how are we going to change the way we look? No offense, but face paint is only going to go so far, man. Ash shook his head. No, that just made me think of a way we can do it convincingly, in a way no one will be able to see through. I'm talking about using Ghastly's powerful psychic abilities to place an illusion over all four of us to completely change our appearances. A small gasp escaped from Giselle as she leaned forward from where she was sitting. Are you serious? How could that possibly work? Brock shook his head and crossed his arms. Actually, that's a brilliant idea. Psychic-type illusions can be strong enough to create what would look to some like an actual physical reality, if the Pokémon using it is powerful enough. And we all know how strong Ghastly's illusions can be, deceivingly so even. Misty interjected then. Okay, so let's say we do this so we aren't recognized. We still have no real plan of any kind when it comes to infiltration of that place, and I'm sure it's heavily guarded. So what do we do about that? Ash looked over at her. Well, first I'll need to have Ghastly sent over here tomorrow so he can start training, do this for us and actually succeed at it. I have no clue how difficult it may be for him, mostly because we don't even know what we'll want to look like yet. He then crossed his arms. As for the operation, I say we go in there at least once or twice and map out the general area accessible to patrons so we have at least some kind of road map to start with. I remember the Team Rocket guy the first interrogated on the Saint Anne telling me about a poster of a Persian in a supply closet in the game lounge that supposedly had a switch of some kind behind it. I can only guess that it allows access to some kind of hidden area. At that moment, before anything else could be said, Ash's extransceiver started to go off. Reaching up to his wrist and pressing the button on the side to accept the call, the black-haired trainer saw a very familiar face fill up.